Welcome back to the screencast for Contemporary Moral Issues College Now. This is World Hunger and Poverty, Part 1B. And as mentioned at the close of the last video, we're going to move on to Peter Singer's article, Famine, Affluence, and Morality. This is on page 452. Peter Singer is a philosopher, not an ecologist, and he was also writing in the early to mid 1970s. He also approached the problems of serious human need from a utilitarian perspective, but his conclusions could not be further from Garrett Hardin's. First, he uses some recent examples, they were recent to him, of human devastation. There was a civil war in the nation of Bengal, and this civil war led to the lack of basic needs being covered for millions of people. Obviously, we all need some basic things to survive: food, water, shelter, freedom from violence, I should say, not freedom from safety. That would mean an entirely different thing. And basic health care, meaning cheap medications that are widely available in wealthy nations, and they're just not in these poor nations because of distribution. So Singer thinks, and we've talked about this argument before, that we're all morally equal in the sense that we're all human beings. So we all have a common humanity. And if you are someone who believes in human rights, everyone has those human rights just by the mere fact that they're human beings. So if you believe this common humanity or human rights theories, you think that those who are suffering such a drastic lack, such a dire need, that if they don't get what they need, they will die, they have a right to life-saving measures if we can possibly help. Singer puts it like this on page 454. He says, I begin with the assumption that suffering and death from lack of food, shelter, and medical care are bad. And if it is in our power to prevent something bad from happening, without thereby sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance, we ought to do it. Now, this last phrase that he said is going to be central to his main argument. What does it mean to say comparable moral importance? Remember that the root of all moral theory can be thought of as value theory. We as human beings put value on objects and situations around us. We say that some objects or situations are good, some are neutral, and some are bad. So when we save our money and we use it for entertainment or for a nice shirt from a designer label, that has moral importance to us. It has value to us. But we would never say that that kind of moral importance is the same exact kind of moral importance as, say, the life of a child. They're not comparably moral. And we might argue about the nitty-gritty details of what exactly is comparable, but almost everybody agrees that at the root of our moral life is the idea that people have a right to their own lives, that life is the most important thing that we possess as human beings. And of course, that entails that we need all of those basic needs met. So this leads Singer to his very famous shallow pond thought experiment. I found this illustration on the internet somewhere and this outdated meme. But the shallow pond thought experiment is this. You just saved your money and you bought a really nice jacket. You spent a couple $100 on it, so it has value to you. You're walking along a road and there's a shallow pond next to you. It's shallow because then it doesn't matter if you personally can swim or not. But it doesn't mean that a child wouldn't drown in it because it's over their head. You see a child drowning And if you go in and you rescue this child, you're going to ruin your clothes. So maybe it's not a jacket, because you can take a jacket off, and they sort of illustrate that in this terrifying cartoon. Say it's a nice suit, and you have to jump in the water right now. You're going to ruin that several $100 piece of clothing that you saved for and that you care about. But most people would say you have an obligation to do so, because otherwise the child would drown. He'd die. This seems pretty straightforward to people. So Singer compares it to everybody else who is going to metaphorically drown if we don't help them. And he doesn't think that proximity, distance, dilutes that obligation to save someone from drowning at all. Just because they're on the other side of the world, you have the ability to help them. So you should be obligated to do so. And if this argument is convincing, well, first he considers two objections. Someone might say, well, there's not one child that's drowning out there. There are millions of people in the world without their basic moral necessities. And I can't help all of them. I don't have that much wealth or time or ability. And two, why should I be the only one to give up my wealth? Shouldn't we all be obligated to give up some wealth equally? So Singer says neither of these objections work against his argument, because yes, there are psychological differences between the case of saving one child versus saving millions of people. But psychological differences are not strong enough to counter moral arguments and moral evidence of people deserving the right to live. If you have the possibility to help, you should help to the maximum of your ability, even if you can't help everybody. And he says, yes, if everybody gave money and things were equalized, it would solve the problem a lot quicker, but you cannot base your own understanding of moral obligation on what everybody else does. It's still your own personal moral duty to help prevent this kind of dire suffering if you can, regardless of what other people do. And so now he says, if his ideas so far have been plausible, we have to redraw the line between duty and charity. What does this mean? We normally think of a moral duty as something we have to do. If we fail to do a duty, we are being morally blameworthy. We're being a bad person. So you might say we have a duty to our children once we have them and accept them into our lives. We don't give them up for adoption. So you have a moral duty to your child, and if you then fail to meet that duty, you are blameworthy. We think of charity as something optional. So that's what supererogatory means over in that little text box on the right. It's something you can choose to do, but you're not obligated to do it. It makes you a moral person who is going above and beyond. But when Singer says we need to redraw these lines, he doesn't think charity should exist anymore. He thinks we need to shift over the marker to the idea that this sort of wealth giving and redistribution is now a moral obligation. We should be required to give our wealth morally, not legally, until we are relinquishing something of comparable moral value. And that's huge. Comparable moral value is life itself. So that would mean that we as wealthy individuals, comparatively wealthy, would have to give all of our extra wealth until our basic needs are just met. And then once everyone's basic needs are met, we can not worry about it anymore. That's the strong version. I'm not sure. I think they might have cut out the weaker version in this section in this reproduction of his article. But he realizes how drastic this change would be and weakens it a little bit and says, okay, significant moral value, I think it is. So that would allow you to save something modestly for the future or save money to put your kids through college. But either way, in the moderate version or the strong version, we would have to radically change our behavior in wealthy nations. I don't need to have a separate slide on the criticisms of Singer because our next article is a directed response to Singer and it's a criticism of him. So we're left as a conclusion to Singer that we need to radically redistribute wealth until everybody's basic needs are met. And John Arthur comes in on page 458 to say where he thinks Singer made mistakes. And his introduction is just reiterating Singer's argument. If it's in our power to prevent something bad from happening without sacrificing something of comparable moral importance, we ought to do so. But according to Arthur, Singer forgets a few things about the justice and the distribution of goods. So goods, remember, are anything that we can use to continue our lives or improve our lives. And yes, everybody has the right to, the negative right to stay alive. But we also have dessert, moral dessert. And what's dessert? It's not what you eat after dinner, it's what you deserve. What do people deserve and why? So if you follow Singer's logic, Arthur says, there are tons of human kinds of harm. People are dying of diseases every day. People who are deprived of a sexual partner may be significantly psychologically harmed. But what does that mean? If someone will die without getting a kidney transplant, we can't say that they have a right to somebody else's kidney because that violates the right of the person who has the healthy kidney. We can't say that the person who doesn't have a sexual partner has a right to someone else's body because people deserve the sanctity of their own life and their own body. So, in other words, you may have the right to life given that you are not violating someone else's rights or the things that other people deserve as well. I think we've mentioned this in class before, but just to reiterate it, there is in political theory and in moral theory the idea that you have negative rights and that you have positive rights. And negative rights are the right of non-interference, like the right not to be killed, the right to safety, also the right to free speech, the right to privacy, property rights, freedom of religion. These are all non-interference rights. People can't come in and interfere with your life because it's your right to live how you so choose. A positive right, Arthur calls it a right of recipients, meaning that you have a right to be given some sort of good. And he claims, and I'm not sure that I buy his argument, but he claims that a negative right is natural right, but a positive right is based on promises and commitments from other people. And so that's pretty true. So when we think about a positive right in terms of government, we might say that a nation's citizens have the positive right to education or to healthcare or to housing. And we do need a network of goods and services to be in place in order for those kinds of positive rights to be fulfilled. But it certainly sometimes can be rescinded once it is offered. So when you sign a contract, you are entering into a system of positive rights between the members or that are party to the contract. There are lots of other reasons why you might want to break that contract up in the future. So sometimes positive rights can be taken away. Not always necessarily. Another aspect to what we might deserve. If we work hard, we save money, we carefully plan for our futures, do we not deserve to reap some of the benefits of those activities, even when we compare it to something that's vastly more morally important, like the life of a child? When we think about what we deserve and what rights we have, a lot of people would make the effort that our labor, intellectual and physical, has made something our property that we are entitled to. So in conclusion, Arthur says that we have to take into account both what we deserve and our inherent rights. And we have to do that on both sides of the equation. It's not just the person who's needy. You have to take it into account for the person who has the wealth. Both sets of people have rights and things that they deserve. So he concludes then, this quote, "It seems to me that a reasonable code would require people to help when there is no substantial cost to themselves. That is, when their sacrificing would not mean a significant reduction in their own or their family's level of happiness." Okay, so we've taken a look at two different consequentialist views of how we are morally obligated to respond to poverty and extreme human suffering. The next time, we're going to move away from consequentialism and look at a rights theory and also a Kantian approach to what we might be obligated to do for people that are suffering. In the meantime, a few things I'd like you to think about that you can maybe write about for your homework are, of course, the strengths and weaknesses of each of the three arguments that we looked at. Which one do you find the most convincing, and importantly, why? That's what, excuse me, I'd like you to investigate the most. I have a feeling, based on past semesters with students, that the very last article will be the most convincing. John Arthur saying that we have entitlements, rights, and things that we deserve. So if that's the case, I'd like you to drill down into your beliefs as to why it seems the most reasonable. Is it because it doesn't require any sort of massive changes to the status quo? Or is it because it is a well-balanced, strong argument? Which of course means they have good evidence that is logically connected to their conclusion. So as always, please email me or comment down below if you have questions or confusions, and I will see you in a few days with the conclusion of this section.